So friends, if you're just joining us, just enjoy the view for a moment. We'll get started in 3 minutes. All right, good morning, friends, and happy Earth Day from all of us here at Ripley's Aquarium of Canada in Toronto. It's a little bit snowy here on this April morning, but hopefully you're enjoying this view of our beautiful Great Lakes exhibit. And of course, Earth Day is a day where we can celebrate nature in all its forms and hopefully renew our actions in terms of caring for the planet. So today we're focusing on local, and local to us is Lake Ontario and our Great Lakes. So that's why we've chosen to come to you today from our Great Lakes exhibit. Of course, Canada is famous for all its fresh water, but most of us probably know more about sharks and coral reefs than we do about what lives just down the street from us. So it seemed like a good opportunity maybe to check in with our local fish friends. So just a little bit of background on the Great Lakes. Of course, there are 5 of them, and there's a little mnemonic that I use to remember them, which is HOMES, H-O-M-E-S, and that helps me remember that the 5 Great Lakes are Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. They're all a little bit different in terms of their characteristics. They're different sizes, different depths, different temperatures, but for the most part, they have similar fish living in them. And of course, not just fish, all kinds of different kinds of wildlife depend on our Great Lakes, including frogs, turtles, insects, mammals, birds, and people. In fact, 40 million people live in and around the Great Lakes region. So that includes all of us here in Canada that live around the Great Lakes and our friends to the south that live on the southern shores of the Great Lakes. And we're depending on those bodies of water for lots of different things. Recreation, of course, they're fun to go and swim in or boat on, but many much more important functions to our day-to-day lives, such as drinking water, moderating our weather, transportation, industry, and agriculture. So a huge, huge part of our lives here in Southern Ontario. And did you know that 84% of the surface freshwater in North America is found in just those 5 Great Lakes? So very, very important indeed. So today we're going to focus on 2 of my favorites that live here in our Great Lakes habitat at the aquarium. This is our 5th largest habitat. Of course, it's freshwater, where most of our exhibits here at the aquarium are saltwater. And it's typically kept at about 14 to 15 degrees Celsius. So pretty cool. It would be a refreshing swim if you're going to jump in. To relate that to what's going on out in the world right now, where my cottage is in Muskoka, I believe the water temperature was 6 degrees Celsius last week. So it's a little bit warmer than our winter water temperatures, but cooler than a lot of our freshwater lakes would be in the summertime. Alrighty, so let's start with the paddlefish. So can we spot any? Let's see. They're pretty easy to pick out. I can see one guy right up here. He's pretty distinctive looking because he's got a paddle, of course. Oh, and I've got 2 more that are conveniently coming our way. See if we can grab them on camera here. Here we go, up here at the top. So 2 more paddlefish here. And they're pretty distinctive looking. They're very interesting fish. They unfortunately do not live in the Great Lakes any longer. They did originally exist in the Great Lakes until about 1917 was the last time a paddlefish was spotted in the Great Lakes. So they're called extirpated. So that means they did live there, but they no longer live there. What do we need to know about paddlefish? Oh, well, hopefully they're going to get something to eat soon, and then they'll show off all of their cool features for you. But paddlefish typically live about 30 to 40 years, so that's their lifespan. Currently, even though they're not in the Great Lakes, they still exist in the Mississippi River Basin, so throughout the U.S. It's not 100% clear to us what happened to extirpate them from the Great Lakes, but it's likely some combination of overfishing and coastal development drove them out. And their current status under the IUCN, so the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, they're classified as vulnerable. So their population is definitely still at risk. Oh, here we go. Here comes their breakfast. So let's see if they're going to show off their feeding behavior for us. Come this way, friends. Alrighty. So what you're going to notice is they swim with their mouth wide open. And people are actually kind of surprised at how big their mouth actually is. And this is because they're considered to be a filter feeder. So if you're familiar with a whale shark or a blue whale, move over this way so you can see better. That's kind of how a paddlefish feeds. So see, it's got its mouth wide open, and the mouth is on the bottom side of that paddle. It's pretty neat because the paddle itself, which is called a rostrum, helps with lift. So as they swim through the water, it helps to hold their mouth open. And as they swim, the water passes through their mouth, and the food, which is tiny zooplankton, gets caught in their gill rakers, and the water keeps going so that it's able to pass through easily so they can get their meal that way. So people are quite surprised when they see them feeding like this. It's quite unusual for a freshwater fish. So that rostrum has some other interesting features. In addition to helping them hold their mouth open, it also has electroreceptors. So they don't have very good eyesight. So similar to how, if you know about a shark or a stingray having electroreceptors, it helps them to find prey because they're, oh, I think those guys even just bumped into each other. They don't have good eyesight. They're so busy focused on eating. And the rostrum helps them sort of sense their surroundings and find food. Here's another guy. So you can really see those gill rakers in action as he's swimming through the food to capture it, closes his mouth to do a big swallow, pushes all that water out. Pretty amazing creatures. So fossil records tell us that paddlefish have been around for about 65 million years. And they have some other features in common with sharks in that they're an obligate ram ventilator. So that's a fancy way of saying they have to keep swimming to breathe. And they have a skeleton that's made out of cartilage. So rather than bone like us, cartilage like your nose or your ears are made out of. So more flexible skeleton. Guys are hungry this morning. They're doing a great job of showing off their feeding behavior for you. All right, so you can continue to watch the paddlefish feeding. And we're gonna switch gears a little bit and talk about one of my other favorites in here. Now, they're all busy collecting all the food that's now on the bottom that the paddlefish didn't grab. So they are called the lake sturgeon. And there's one guy here. So they're a big, big fish. They've got chin whiskers. Those are called barbels. And they also help this fish find food. Scourging along the bottom. There's another guy over here. Let's see his barbels on the bottom a little bit. I think probably once they're done eating, they'll swim farther up for us so we can see their features a bit more closely. The lake sturgeon is the largest freshwater fish found in Canada. They're also super impressive. Some amazing statistics about them. When I say largest, they can get to be over 2.5 meters long, and they can weigh up to 180 kilograms. Let's move over this way. Here's another guy over here. There we go. Now you can see those nice barbels he's showing off for you. So we're talking about a really, really big fish. They have been in the fossil record for close to 200 million years. And their lifespan is an impressive average of 100 years. So the females live longer than the males. And I believe the oldest one ever found was 155 years old. So not all fish have short lifespans. Many have very, very long lifespans. They have a really interesting skin. So it's heavily armored. It's not made out of scales. It's made out of denticles. So again, more similarities to sharks, which is really interesting in freshwater fish. Their skin is supposedly so strong that it could stop a bullet. And of course, that's really great for defense for them, so they can protect themselves. They are a bottom feeder, so you can see them cleaning up the bottom of the exhibit here where that fish or that food is making its way down, that the paddlefish didn't manage to skim through the top of the water column. And as I said, those barbels, those little chin whiskers, are great for helping them find food that's buried in the sediment. So they would detect probably crab and shellfish, and then they can get to it by digging sort of with the end of their nose there to dig it up. Unfortunately, the Great Lakes population of the lake sturgeon is considered to be endangered. So these fish close to 100 years ago now, were seriously overfished. Because they have such a long lifespan, typically animals like that don't reproduce until later in life, and they don't reproduce every year. So they're slow to reproduce their population. So they were overfished for their meat, and also their eggs were considered very desirable as a caviar kind of dish. So they were seriously overfished from that perspective. And also where they spawn was likely affected by coastal development and is also now being impacted by climate change. So that's a bit of a sad story. However, since they were listed, they have been protected, and so you can no longer fish for them in the same way, and there's efforts being made to help their population recover, and they are a bit of a good news story. So their population is slowly recovering, which is great, because it would be pretty sad to lose these guys altogether. They don't have any teeth, so these guys swallow their food whole. These guys are really enjoying their breakfast this morning. Alrighty. So, why should we care about these fish and about the Great Lakes in particular? Well, we talked earlier a little bit about all the things that we need the Great Lakes for. So, drinking water, recreation, transportation, agriculture, all of those important things involve the Great Lakes water system. And of course, we want that water to stay clean, and a great way to help maintain the health of the lakes is to make sure that the fish populations are also stable. So like all of the water bodies on Earth, the Great Lakes are being affected by climate change. So warming water temperatures are affecting spawning of fish and their survival rates. Plastic pollution, of course, is a huge problem for all water bodies as well. So you're probably familiar with marine debris and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, but the Great Lakes have a plastic problem as well. It's estimated that 22 million pounds of plastic waste enter the Great Lakes every year. That's a lot of plastic. And if this is something that you're interested in learning more about and what you can do to help, you should tune in later today at 3 o'clock. We're going to have an interview with Cassie Sherlock, who's going to tell us all about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes. And that's going to be really interesting, I think, to learn more about that and some of the efforts underway to help clean up the plastic. And then another factor that's affecting the Great Lakes is invasive species. So things like lamprey and round goby and Asian carp can pose a big threat to our local aquatic ecosystems. An invasive species is something that is introduced either on purpose or by accident that doesn't belong. And it's typically characterized by the ability to reproduce very, very quickly. Typically, they are a generalist eater, so they'll eat pretty much anything they can find, and they lack predators. So because they're not natural to that ecosystem, none of the other animals in that habitat recognize them as food. So the invasive species that get in are often released from ballast water on boats, or people moving their recreational boats between water bodies, or people releasing pets that they no longer want, which is not a good practice. And so keeping an eye out for invasive species is really helpful. And again, we're going to be bringing you more information about that in the coming weeks. So make sure you keep an eye on our social media and our YouTube channel. We're going to talk to you more about lamprey and Asian carp and some of the invasive species that we have here in Ontario and what we can do to help them. So I think that's all I've got to tell you about the Great Lakes. I see you had a couple questions come in. How many species of fish are there in the world? I believe the last tally was somewhere around 40,000. But that's something that's always changing. We're always learning more about freshwater and marine species of fish and discovering new species. So definitely that's something you should look up and learn about on your own. And do we have names for the fish? I don't think any of the fish in this habitat have names. Some of ours do. So some of the sharks have names. Our two green sea turtles, of course, have names. They are Spot and Chewy, and they're the stars of the aquarium. But typically our smaller fish like this, we don't name them. Any other questions that I can answer? You can type them in the chat if you have a question that you want to know about Great Lakes or the fish in here. The paddlefish are still eating, so we'll go and get another quick look at them. I'm trying to get every last little bit of plankton out of the water that they can find. So hopefully, because today is Earth Day, you're making an extra special effort to reduce your plastics usage, to use less energy, to think about what kind of changes you can make to help protect our Earth so that we can keep it healthy for generations to come. Talk to your family about things that you can do at home to make your house more efficient or create less waste. Oh, great question from Suzanne. What is the best way to protect the water in the Great Lakes? It depends. So there's lots of things as individuals that we can do. So a big thing right now is making sure that any trash and stuff outside doesn't make its way to the lake. So after the winter, there's lots of litter and stuff around. That's if it goes into the stormwater sewers, typically goes straight out into the lake. So making sure that all of our garbage, particularly our PPE, is disposed of correctly. And things like hazardous materials and stuff, of course, making sure that they never go down the drain, that they get disposed of properly. And then on a bigger level, there's sort of collective action that we can take is advocating for protections for our Great Lakes. So whether that's with your local government or with the provincial government or with the federal government, letting your elected officials know that the Great Lakes are important to you and that you want them to be protected. So writing letters, sending emails, all that kind of good stuff is important. The more they know that people care, I think the more likely they are to take action to protect them. Okay, so I have a grade 1 class asking why the paddlefish mouth opens so wide. And really, it's just to take advantage of catching as many things as possible as they swim across. I'm gonna try and get a good view. There's a guy here. Oh, where did he go? There he is. Oh, they're gonna cross here. So the more surface area they have available for catching food, the more they will be able to eat. So that's essentially why their mouth is open so wide. And then I have another question. Are certain species of fish home to each different lake? Yes, there would be some differences between what you would find in Lake Superior, which is really cold and really deep, versus Lake Erie, which is shallower and warmer. But for the most part, a freshwater fish in Ontario is pretty much found in most bodies of freshwater in Ontario. So there would be probably more similarities than differences, but some sort of local differences based on environmental conditions. Next question is, how many fish live here at the aquarium? We approximate that we have about 20,000 animals at the aquarium. That includes all of our baby jellyfish that we're raising, lots of seahorses, all the juvenile fish, and then of course all the big stuff as well. That encompasses about 450 different species, so that's the number of types of fish that we have. This habitat, Great Lakes, has about a dozen different types of fish, and probably I'm just estimating here. I'm saying like probably maybe 50 or 60 fish total living in it. So there's several sturgeon, there's several paddlefish, there's several bluegills, that kind of stuff. But there's about 12 different species represented here. Okay, I have another grade 1 class asking, do fish swim when they sleep? So fish don't really sleep the same way that we do. They don't quite have that luxury of just tucking themselves into bed for the night and going straight to sleep. So they kind of rest more than sleep. And anybody that's an obligate ram ventilator, so like our paddlefish or like some species of sharks, they have to keep swimming to breathe. So they do this cool trick where only half of their brain goes to sleep at a time. And so they kind of shut off half their brain and the other brain is busy keeping them moving and swimming and being aware of the environment, and then they can switch back and forth. Other fish might traditionally more rest, so they might find a little crevice where they can go and hang out in. There's a bunch of guys, let's see, over here. You can see that they're kind of just chilling, finding a little rocky crevice or whatever where they can feel protected, and they're probably more actively resting. There's definitely differences in activity level throughout the day. Next question. How did you gather all these different fish into the aquarium? That's a great question. So the aquarium's been open for 7.5 years total. Of course, we've been closed for most of the last 12 months or so. We were able to be open for a little bit last summer and fall. So it depends on the type of fish where we got them from. So lots of these Great Lakes fish are raised in aquaculture facilities because there are efforts to restock them. So that means that people are raising trout or muskie or whatever, and then putting them back into our Great Lakes, particularly for recreational fishing. So we can get them from those sources. A lot come from other aquariums around the world and around North America in particular. So there's an aquarium in Quebec and an aquarium in Vancouver, and we typically do lots of trading with them. And we've also traded with the Toronto Zoo recently. We were able to get some potbelly seahorses from them, and they took some of our freshwater stingrays. So those are our first two choices, are to get them from some sort of other human care facility. If we're not able to do that and they're not reproducing here at the aquarium or when the aquarium first opened, we do sometimes go and have to collect them from the wild. So in which case there's lots of permits and stuff that we get to make sure that we are doing it safely, to maintain that population, make sure that we're not taking too many or harming the environment when we do that. And then we have two special ways that we can bring them to the aquarium from outside. So we have a mobile aquarium we can put on a trailer and pull behind a pickup truck if it's something small. And we have a huge tractor trailer with a mobile aquarium on the back that we can use to move something bigger. And essentially it has everything that animals need to maintain their environmental conditions. So it has heaters or coolers on it. It has filters and pumps, and so that we can maintain water quality while they're in transit. Do fish sleep with their eyes open? Yes, for the most part. If they're resting, their eyes are still open. That's mostly because they don't have eyelids. So let's try and, if this guy will hold still for us. So you'll notice they never blink. It's because they don't have eyelids. So their eyes are always open, even if they're sleeping. How long do fish live? So that also really varies. So some have quite short lifespans, might only live for sort of 2 or 3 years, would be considered a shorter lifespan. But remember I said the sturgeon have this amazing long life. And so they can live easily to be 100. And the oldest one ever found in Canada was 155 years old. Other types of fish really vary. So like our stingrays, we'd expect to live into their 30s. Many live in the sort of like 10 to 15 year range. It really just depends on each species. Our oldest fish or animal we have here at the aquarium, it's really hard to say. As I said, the aquarium's only been open for 7.5 years. And so if the animals were brought to us from somewhere else, unless they were born in human care, we don't really have any way of knowing how old they are now. After they die, there is a way to age a fish using a bone in their ear. So kind of like how you could count the rings of a tree to figure out how old it was. You can do that with a bone in the ear of the fish, but not while they're alive, only after they've died. So I know one of our big stingrays we think is probably about 30 years old. But a lot of them, we don't really have any idea. And I don't know with these sturgeon how old they are. I would guess honestly, I don't know. Could be anything from 10 or 12 years up to 50 years. Why do fish not have eyelids? That's a great question. I don't know. They don't have them. They didn't evolve to. I guess the function I'm inferring here. So as a scientist, I know that my eyelids help to keep my eyes clean and moist. So when you're blinking, you're keeping your eyes lubricated and clearing them of dust. I guess if you live in an aquatic environment, you don't have to worry about keeping your eye moist because it's always moist because you live in water. So maybe that's why they don't need eyelids. But that's another great question. I bet you could look up and maybe you can find some different answers. The leopard spotted fish we were just looking at, that is a gar, I believe. And he swam away, so I'm not sure where he ended up. Oh, here he is. He's over here. You can have another look at him. This guy. He's a gar, G-A-R. And there's a few different species in here. It's really pretty, isn't he? I think people don't think that great freshwater fish are very attractive. I mean, they're not colorful like tropical fish are that live on a coral reef because their habitat is typically darker and murkier. There wouldn't be an advantage to being yellow or purple or red or blue. It's more advantageous to be browns and greens. But when you take the time to look closely, a lot of them are actually quite attractive looking. All right, let's see what other questions we have coming in. How many fish are in this tank? I don't know for sure, but I think it's probably about 50. And there's about 12 different species altogether. So some there's only maybe 1 or 2, but some there's like 10 or 12 of each species. Why do fish have different colors? We're getting into some real hypothetical, big questions here. So fish have different coloration similar to other animals having different coloration. So they need to be able to recognize each other so they can find a mate when it's time to do that. So they need patterns that way. They need to be able to hide from predators. So they need different patterns on their body that would help them to camouflage. Or if they're not hiding from predators, then they are a predator and they need coloration to help them hide so that they can ambush their prey when it comes by. Why else might they have different colors? Depends on the habitat where they live. Some get involved in mimicry, so less so with fish, but there's like lots of animals in terrestrial environments that are stripy as warning to warn people that they're venomous or they sting or they're poisonous. And then there'll be other animals that pretend to look like them to try and fool prey. So they might have yellow and black stripes to pretend to be a wasp, even though they're not a wasp at all. So lots of different reasons why animals might have different colors. Why are fish so long? Well, I mean, I think it probably has partly to do with how they move and behave in water. So a long body shape is well adapted for swimming and living in an aquatic environment. And then The variety of lengths will depend on the size of the fish and what they eat, and all those kinds of interesting things. These are great questions, guys. Do we have a platypus at the aquarium? I wish. Platypus are so cool. Platypus are a mammal. We don't have any mammals at our aquarium. I personally got to go to an aquarium in Sydney, Australia many years ago and got to see a platypus they had on display there, and they're such a cool animal. So I don't know. I don't think we're getting mammals here anytime in the future, but I'll put that on my wish list of animals to get if we get the opportunity. How do fish communicate? Oh, interesting. In a variety of ways. Some of them do make sounds. We don't really notice them because we're not in the water with them, but our divers do talk about the sounds that fish make. They can communicate with each other using chemical signals, so like pheromones, so they might be able to smell each other. They can sense movement, so a lot of fish have an organ called a lateral line, which helps them to sense the movement of the water. And then remember I said the paddlefish use electroreception, so they're able to sense electrical impulses, so that would include heartbeat and muscle movement in other animals. So that helps them to detect where other fish are. And then, of course, they can communicate with body language too if they need to, just like we do as humans. What is a good fish to keep as a pet? Well, this is definitely something where you need to be a conscientious consumer. So you need to do your research to know what you are capable of caring for at home. What kind of level of care are you going to be able to provide? And so you need to know what different kinds of fish need in order to be happy and healthy. So how big of a space do they need? What food types do they need? Do they need, how warm does the water need to be? And so I'm not going to recommend one fish over another, but that's definitely something that you need to discuss with your family about who's going to be responsible for caring for the fish so that you make a good choice. And then, yeah, do lots of research before you make a decision. Oh, I love this question. What are daily things we can do to save endangered fish and oceans? So small things that we can do. So climate change is affecting everything on the planet. And so things that we can do as individuals to help with climate change are driving less, using electricity at home, less electricity at home, and using less plastic. So plastic is made from fossil fuels, which contribute carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, which is causing warming of the oceans and the globe as a whole. Other things that we can do are to share what we know. So talking to your family and friends about making good choices, things like using your reusable water bottle and your reusable straw and your reusable cutlery. So declining and not using plastic bags if you can avoid it, to make sure that we're using less of those things and reminding other people to do the same. And then, yeah, talk if you feel very strongly to make sure that you talk to people who are in a position to make decisions about the rules for companies and government. So writing to your city government or your provincial government or your federal government to let them know that this is something that's really important to you and you would like them to care about it as well. And that's a really great question to ask on Earth Day, because it's a perfect day for us to think about it. How do fish shut down their brain? That's a difficult question to answer. I can't say I understand how it exactly works, but it's a really cool trick that sharks and some fish are able to do. But I think that would be something I would need to do more research on before I could try and explain it. So definitely look that up as a class after. Do fish have different colored eyes? Good question. I think they do. I'm looking at a few of the ones in front of me to see if I can notice any differences. Most of them seem to have like a brownish or blackish eye. Again, that's going to take a little bit of looking around, I think, to see what we can find. But yes, I would assume that there's some variation in fish eyes. Where are the octopus located? Here at the aquarium, they're in this gallery, so in Canadian waters, but a little bit farther in the ocean, they can be found. Our type of octopus we have here at the aquarium is a giant Pacific octopus, and it is native to the west coast of Canada. So you could find it off the coast of British Columbia. Okay, friends, I think we're going to leave it there. So yeah, please come back at 3 o'clock this afternoon to meet Cassie Sherlock and learn about plastic pollution in the Great Lakes a little bit more. This is going to stay up on our YouTube channel, and that conversation with Cassie will as well. So you can come back later if you're not able to catch it at 3. Thank you so much for all of your great questions. Let's protect the Earth together. Have a great Earth Day.